Even draping a blanket over your face for just a few seconds can make you feel short of breath. Now imagine being locked in a pitch-black, tight cave, entirely unable to move, even your arms, knowing there's no easy way out and that death is slowly approaching. This is the terrible true story of a young guy named Cavern Neil Moss, who found himself stuck in such a terrifying circumstance, and despite valiant efforts to free him, he would never escape alive. The incident occurred in 1959 in the United Kingdom. Neil Moss was just 20 years old, a bright and promising student at the prestigious Oxford University, regarded one of the finest intellectual institutions in the world. Neil was not only a great student but also a lover of the outdoors. He had a profound interest for adventure, especially exploring natural places like forests, mountains, and underground tunnels. That desire would ultimately lead to his early and terrible death. On March 22, 1959, Neil chose to explore a massive and complicated cave system near Derbyshire, England, known as Peak Cavern. At the time, this cave was not a well-developed tourist destination like it is today. There were no guided tours or current safety measures. Neil traveled with a group of seasoned cave explorers. While the others were trained professionals, Neil himself was more of an eager amateur. Nonetheless, he was ready to explore the unknown. Once inside the cave system, Neil was drawn to a tiny vertical shaft, a constricted hole that fell around 35 feet deep. It was a perilous region, and the opening was exceedingly tight, even for a skinny person. But Neil, who stood over 6 feet 3 inches tall with a big physique, decided to attempt it anyhow. As he dropped, he suddenly became completely trapped. He couldn't move forward or backward, and the walls pressed closely against his body, preventing even the slightest movement. His arms were pinned, and the area was so restricted that breathing became more impossible. He wasn't alone. 7 others were close, and as they learned he was stuck, they hurriedly evacuated the cave and summoned rescue. Very quickly, rescue teams arrived on the scene, including members of the Royal Navy, adept climbers, and professional cavers. Everyone understood time was important. The deeper Neil remained in that position, the worse his situation would grow. The rescue attempt swiftly evolved into a race against time. First, they attempted lowering ropes, hoping Neil could somehow be dragged up. But the ropes snapped or slipped, and the narrowness of the shaft made every step perilous. One rescuer was even lowered down into the shaft to put a rope around Neil's waist. Though the team managed to elevate him 18 inches, he was wedged in so firmly that any more movement was impossible. Neil's height and broad shoulders had effectively locked him in place. By now, Neil had been detained for hours, and his physical state was deteriorating rapidly. Rescuers managed to deliver him an oxygen mask and some food, but his weakness had become so great that he couldn't even grip the goods. Despite their own tiredness and the increasingly deadly air inside the shaft, thick with carbon dioxide, the rescue workers refused to give up. They kept chatting to Neil, telling him to stay awake and stay strong. By the next day, approximately 19 hours had passed. Neil was still conscious but fading. Around 1 p.m., one of the rescue personnel reported that Neil was scarcely responding and was on the edge of unconsciousness. More extreme efforts followed. Workers attempted smashing the surrounding granite using hammers and chisels in an attempt to expand the shaft. Others began excavating a tunnel from below, attempting to reach him from another angle. But the cave's architecture made the work very sluggish and risky. No big machinery could reach that portion of the cavern, and time was slipping away. As 36 hours passed by, hope began to evaporate. The toxic air was now a menace to everyone in the cave. Some rescuers even fell owing to the insufficient oxygen levels. But they pushed on, since Neil was still breathing, barely. Finally, in the early hours of March 24, around 3 a.m., Neil Moss died in the very place he had become stuck. His father, Eric Moss, who had been present during the rescue attempt, took the sad decision to leave Neil's body in the cave, fearing more lives could be lost trying to remove it. The precise portion of the cave where he died was later called the Moss Chamber in his memory. To this day, Neil's bones are still within that cave, undisturbed, a permanent part of the underground environment he was so anxious to discover. His story continues to haunt the people of Derbyshire and remains one of the most catastrophic caving incidents in British history. In the years that followed, Neil's narrative lived on. The rescuers were awarded medals for their bravery and relentless effort. In 2004, a novel named One Last Breath was published, detailing the occurrence in dramatic detail. 2 years later, in 2006, a documentary named Fight for Life, the Neil Moss story was published, further immortalizing the young man's awful fate. Neil Moss's narrative is more than just a tale of misadventure. It is a reminder of the fragility of life, the unpredictability of nature, and the tremendous courage demonstrated by people who risked all to attempt to save him.